past the kids are gone now for the day. She reaches for the coffee as the school bus pulls away. Another day to tend the house and plan for Friday at the Legion when she's dancing with her man. Sure was a bitter winter, but Friday will be fine, and maybe last year's Easter dress will serve her one more time. She passed for 29, but for her eyes, but winter lines are telling wicked lies.
Hello, Canada and hockey fans in the United States and Newfoundland.
There are more of us than ever before. But it's always a question of quality as against quantity in these lives.
Here we have the essence and genius of Canadianism. Unity through division.
Everybody realizes that Mr. Trudeau doesn't give a tinker's damn for Western Canada.
Two full-blown separatist movements have grown up under the Liberals and Conservatives.
For the first time in our history, parents believe that the future of their children will be less promising than their own.
Because the rules of economics are, first of all, competence.
But listen, you kid, don't get caught in the Canadian syndrome, where if it's Canadian, it's got to be bad. We're the best. I've been telling you the best.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Red Ensign Live. Tonight I am pleased to welcome a special guest, Dave Greene. Dave, welcome to the show.
Always happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. You are one of a handful of non-Canadians that I've included in the show, though I suppose your wife's Canadian, so maybe I can give you some credit there.
My son's also a dual citizen, so I'm the only non-Canadian in my whole family.
Well, there you go. Well, I'm actually not here to talk to you about Canada. We're going to depart from the typical practice of this show, which has an overwhelming focus on our own country, and talk a little bit about wider currents in the anti-progressive discourse that run. I mean, they're significant in the United States, but they run across the gamut. I see these things in the German online right. I see these things in the British online right. I see these things in the American online right. The fact that they are kind of refracted differently across national borders, I think, is quite interesting. I try to keep my interventions in that discourse pretty minimal. Over the summer, I wrote 2 essays, one of which was titled "It's Time for the Right to Grow Up," which was my last attempt to intervene in this discourse. I don't think it had a lot of algorithmic success. A lot of people read it, but I don't think that the right has particularly grown up in the intervening session. So
I love the essay. That was a certified banger, but yeah, I don't know if who's listening to it is always the question,
Well,
we have to deal with in our spheres.
I mean, I think 7,000 people read it on Substack. There's a long way between that and the New York Times. So, anyways,
you only get into the New York Times by denouncing the dissident, right?
Well, I always have that card to play.
I know. Well, you might have to also be of the fairer sex, but
yeah,
leave that aside.
Yeah, I'm white and male. That does count against me. But in honor of your appearance, I'm gonna run an ad spot for a community association, as you've pushed pretty hard. This is from a friend of the show, Nathan Hood, who operates the Pendragon Association in the UK. They work at castle restorations as part of a broader set of cultural projects for the Anglosphere. I'll hit the ad and you can have a look.
Mm-hmm.
Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. The Pendragon Foundation invites you to the King's Flame Festival, a 3-day celebration of over 1,000 years of English history. Celtic, Saxon, Norman and medieval. We are going to honour our ancestors and lands together at a historic castle in the middle of England. Behold the clash of steel as brave warriors do battle. Witness enchanting singers and storytellers. Get hands-on in the craftsman's market and participate in the ceremonial lighting of the King's Flame. Reignite the fire. Join us for the King's Flame Festival, the 2nd to the 4th of July, 2027.
So if you find yourself in the United Kingdom in the month of July, make an effort. But more broadly, Pendragon is doing great work with Nathan over there in taking the networks we've established in the online world and applying them to a productive goal for the restoration of our own culture. So whether it's as simple as buying one of their calendars or maybe you can get involved personally, fascinating organization to get involved with. I would encourage the audience to do so.
And I do think I mentioned this. I'm most familiar with his work collaborating on the Corncrake magazine, correct?
Yep.
I'm a big fan of that project. So I'm not in the United Kingdom anytime soon, but I think that Pendragon thing sounds like an exciting new development.
Yeah, I mean, Corncrake is fiction. I read about 3 pieces of fiction a year, so it's always a stretch for me to buy a fiction magazine. But
yeah,
it
makes an excellent coffee table book though, because they've got a mixture of classics and new authors. So I found that to be a good little combination.
Well, I bought their Castles image calendar for 2026 for my son, and he loves looking at the castles, and every month I read him a story about a new castle. For a 5-year-old boy, that's pretty neat.
I also have a son that likes castles, so that's a good investment, I think.
So, but I do want to get into it with you. I thought a lot about how to begin to unpack this topic. You have made a theme of your podcast over the last maybe 4 to 6 months, quite a long time here. Discussing the phenomena of apostasy from the distant right is probably the best way to put it. And you've recently divided that phenomena into 2. There's apostasy from the distant right as a consequence of status games. So there's a whole collection of female creators who have apostatized from the distant right, done so very publicly by denouncing a lot of their former colleagues, fairly obviously in order to play status games of one kind or another. Either in real life or as simply as just getting themselves published in the New York Times or whatever. That's a dynamic that I think is kind of a tale as old as time. It's in my mind, it is an inevitable dynamic of a movement that cannot offer as much power and prestige to its adherents as the mainstream can. You're always going to have people who cynically join it and cynically leave it in order to kind of social climb. There is an important kind of marker here in that it is a reminder that it's a reminder to us about how and why leaders should be chosen. So you might imagine on the one hand you have your ideal leader, and on the other end of the spectrum you have Lauren Southern.
I've always really hated Lauren Southern. I apologize if that offends any in the audience, but I'm in the Lauren Southern anti-fan club.
Yeah, I mean, she is a Canadian, so it is one of our great contributions to the early discourse. She and Stefan Molyneux. Neither of which are figures that I would exactly want to follow into battle, but for very different reasons. So that's kind of one element, and I talked about this a little bit in the essay I wrote, It's Time for the Dissident Right to Grow Up, basically arguing that the characteristics of leadership that the online right should be selecting for is the ability to have ownership over problems over a long period of time, to demonstrate a kind of deep bond that actually even less competent leaders who are deeply bonded with the coalitions they lead are preferable to slightly more competent leaders that are that have their interests and futures divided from the people that they lead.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of critical. But please keep on elaborating.
So this is kind of one piece. I don't want to spend most of our time on this podcast discussing this piece. The more interesting part of that to me is how that set of people came to be prominent in the online right, rather than why they abandoned it. Why they abandoned it kind of seems straightforward. The fact that these people thought the online right had sufficient clout to join it in the period between sort of 2013 and 2018 is more interesting to me than why they abandoned it. On the other hand, there is a set of what I would call more material fractures that have appeared on the online right, and I would argue that they've appeared for two basic reasons. First of all, the dialectic that the online right emerged into no longer exists, and the second is that there are significant elements within the online right that believe they got a sniff of power, either through reform in the UK or through the Trump administration, and you have a kind of classic. It looks to me identical to the way that power pollutes academia. Power and money pollute the online discourse in essentially exactly the same way. So whether it's a little bit of patronage coming out of Mr. Musk, whether it's a little bit of money filtering into the scene through Team Red in the US, or whether it's this perception that through propaganda, the online right could become an actual political actor in the U.S. scene, rather than people outside of power. I think that's a significant element in this story that needs to kind of be understood. But I want to take us back to the political dialectic that existed maybe 2012 through 2018. This is the period where the dominant media narrative is that demographics have become destiny in the United States, and there is permanent progressive ascendancy in that country, and that the rest of the American empire is solidly on this course towards a permanent progressive coalition of migrants plus neoliberals on this kind of dual program of what I might call like neo-Marxist and neo-Marxist kind of what came to be known as woke, paired with a kind of master. So they would be, to some degree, the clients. The masters in that relationship would be the kind of neoliberal managerial types. And there was a lot of confusion about who was master and who was slave in that relationship for a long time.
Well, I mean, I didn't quite catch the direction of that description, but I think the optimism of that vision of eternal progressive ascendancy is what kind of dropped off in the last 5 years since COVID. I mean, like they thought they could reestablish it with the Biden, but I think that, I think the EU still thinks they're going to have it in Europe, but I think that what a lot of progressive intellectuals realized, if they didn't realize it in 2023, they realized it with the election of Trump in 2024. I don't think that Trump is really going to give them that much trouble. He gave them a bloody nose with the whole Doge thing going after USAID, which was, I think that's one of the biggest setbacks they've ever had since World War II, or since Nixon at least. And, but that wasn't the real blow to the progressive psyche. The real blow to the progressive psyche is looking at the numbers in 2024 and realizing that their coalition was super fragile.
Yeah, that's right.
It would crumble, and it doesn't mean like Trump is going to be the one disrupting it, but it means pretty much anything can disrupt it. The progressives thought that these minority populations would that they were adding into their mix, at least in the United States, would vote like 40-year-old urban women liberals or African Americans, basically progressive stalwarts. They never flip, but they vote like marginal Democratic voters. They will flip the second they think they're going to get a better deal from anybody. Even the horrible Donald Trump. So, even if they do defeat Trump and all these populists, they still have a political basis that is highly unstable, and any contender will just be able to, subvert it instantly.
Yeah, you saw an identical dynamic emerge in Canada where during the late Trudeau government, the Conservative Party of Canada pulled ahead of the Liberals by a significant margin in the Sikh community. Right, the Sikh community is one of the communities that Justin Trudeau increased in size by an order of magnitude during the time he was leader of this country, only for the Liberals to be on the wrong side of the electoral splits in this community. I think you're entirely correct to point out that in the period between 2023 and 2026, there has been a fracture between the neoliberal element and what I would call like the neo-Marxist third worldist types. And the reason I draw attention to this change in dynamic is that the fact that these two items aren't in alignment disrupts a lot of the dialectics that the online right practiced in the period between 2014 and 2022. So if I go back to that world, almost continuously through that world, you saw the same statement exist in dialectic to two completely different things. And the same statement, to give an example, race realism exists in dialectic to both neoliberal managerialism and Marxist third worldism.
Yes.
But it exists, the people forming the dialectic against these two items believe completely different things under the surface, even though from a cosmetic point of view, they're both in dialectic to the power establishment that existed between 2014 and 2022. So on the one hand, you had, the Jordan Peterson types in this period saying, differences in outcome aren't necessarily evidence of racism. The woke aren't right about the need to use extremely intrusive measures in order to generate equality of outcome. On the other hand, you had Kofefe Annan saying the woke are more correct than the mainstream. In fact, the only reason that outcomes are even where they are is because of this incredibly intrusive civil rights apparatus that has existed for 50 plus years.
Yeah.
And so you had in alignment two things which appeared on the surface fairly similar, but if you interrogated them at any depth, were completely different. Another good example of this is in the propaganda space, where you had people like Academic Agent, who are students of Marcuse and very much out of the neo-Marxist tradition in the way that he analyzed rhetoric and made use of a lot of this kind of a lot of these intellectual tools, appearing in the same algorithmic bundle with James Lindsay, right? Yeah. And if you dug at the content, obviously these are very different things. But from an algorithmic point of view, in terms of what you were served via social media, they looked similar. And from the point of view of looking at this from coalitional politics, both of them existed in opposition to the same thing. The fact that the neoliberal managerial state has broken its tie to some degree with elements of its kind of third worldist client, has completely disrupted this commonality and unleashed kind of a predictable war in the online right. And that predictable war began with going after Joel Berry and James Lindsay, but the fissures here are actually quite deep, and they have been deep for a very long time.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways we could take that. I think that the right has a problem with this in that it has to deal with a large amount of its popular constituency being boomers or older people, and they're just not willing to kind of move in the directions that seem more or less natural for people who are young to middle age, and I kind of include myself in the latter category at this stage. But the left has to deal with the fact that it has a division between first world and third. And, this is a horrible, horrible figure on the stage today, but kind of interesting to watch for kind of the antics he creates. Hassan Piker.
Yeah.
Every progressive intellectual is currently in the process of humiliating themselves, holding their nose, forcing themselves to endorse this guy, this absolute moron of a streamer, and pretend that he's some kind of profound sage, because they rightfully understand that he is the key for capturing at least the male half of young immigrant men inside Western countries, or it's either him or people like him, even though he's not at the demographic at all. He's like a rich kid.
Yeah.
I think that with the James Lindsay thing, and the problem with all of these things is that I'm not really so sure that there is a young constituency for people like Lindsay or Peterson. I think that on the Daily Wire, I think they sell mainly to older people.
See, I have a bit of a different view. So Lindsay and Peterson have aesthetics that lock them out of the younger audience. But if you look at guys like Captive Dreamer as an example, in my view, they're basically selling the same thing to a younger audience. And what I mean by selling the same thing is that they're, if you look at the different kind of the differences in intellectual tradition that exist between Jordan Peterson and Kofi Annan in their opposition to racial reparations in the United States, there's a whole contingent of young men on Team Red who are part of the tradition that Jordan Peterson represents, and not part of the tradition that Kofi Annan represents, right?
Yeah.
And so if you look at the younger demographic, that same fracture still exists, except it exists in like Zoomer-coded aesthetics and language. And so if you look at the Civil War and the Mega Coalition, a lot of it actually runs down the lines of these two intellectual traditions that are going to look at current events radically differently, and kind of process the moment radically differently because of these two very different intellectual lenses.
Well, I mean, I am aware of people who are kind of younger and more in the moderate MAGA camp, more of the kind of patriot conception of themselves. But I guess I just have a harder time discerning what is organic and what is kind of
fair enough.
It's obvious that in the division between MAGA and America First, it is incredibly clear that the algorithm prefers MAGA and does not prefer America First. Those names are confusing when it comes to kind of the divide between Europe, but
this is a very important point, right? One of the weird consequences of the Musk takeover of when Musk took over Twitter, many of us assumed that he opened up the algorithm for anti-progressive forces to begin with. But in the last year, maybe the last year and a half, you've gotten interventions in the algorithm that would make Jack Dorsey blush. in terms of managing the way that narratives are allowed to pass through the form. I mean, the Iran war has been more carefully curated in social media than even the 2020 election was, though I would argue much more competently so, in that in the 2020 election, they just engaged in a lot of hard censorship and banned a lot of people, whereas the use of algorithmic suppression has gotten a lot more sophisticated. So now I can tweet to my 22,000 followers and get 200 impressions. Whereas then I would have just gotten banned for tweeting something that the platform was uncomfortable with. Which is has, I think, enhanced a lot of this frustration, because the universe of opinions people can see is actually even narrower now than it was in 2021, 2022 with the height of censorship.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I mean, it's kind of through the looking glass, because all of us are there. You know, Mr. Musk is paying us to be there, and yet the messages that can be communicated through these forums are extremely controlled.
Yeah. I mean, and also it's you know, all of these social media platforms are kind of getting. They're getting degraded in terms of the prestige they command, and in terms of just the quality of the experience using them. You're just, even if you pay, you're deluged with just really low quality stuff. And I mean, it's not like Facebook. Facebook is completely just been taken over by slop, but it's kind of getting there, right? And I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say with Twitter, because I feel like in the last year or two, all social media has been dying.
Yeah, I agree with this, and I'm not sure exactly. Like, I singled out Twitter because it's a platform whose algorithm I'm deeply familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But you're quite right in that Facebook is very, very dead. YouTube is kind of a different beast, but it's YouTube as a dialectical property, where you're introduced to new creators and new content, is very weak at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, if I go back, people for the first time in 10 years. I mean, if I go, people are unsubscribing, it's because I get 0 new people on uploads that I make there.
This is the point. Like, if you go back to the period before 2020, you were able to get exposure to a lot of people. I mean, I found your channel organically by searching related videos talking about reactionary content. I never get introduced to new interesting creators on the platform any longer. Not unless I see them featured on somebody's show and discover them that way.
Yeah, that is very interesting. That the only way that you can actually get people is by going on other platforms, and it's going to be, I don't know, I think that might be that way indefinitely. It's tragic, but I kind of was expecting this for a long time, that the future of these platforms would kind of fall off. But then again, I mean, it's not like this is the golden age of progressive political content. Everybody is dying. And if you look at the old bread tubers, I mean, half of them are insane now and aren't producing anything. Or I should say insane. They're suffering from mental health episodes that prevent them from regularly creating content. But no, they all are, and they're not growing. And there's the people who are the big dogs, like Hassan Piker. They got their start 6 years ago, you know?
Which actually brings me back to kind of the next piece of this discussion that I wanted to have. So we spent a few minutes talking about the fact that there are underlying, in my opinion, kind of deeply held intellectual fractures that were present in the online right going back a very long way. That part of the reason why I believe they've erupted into the discourse right at the moment is the change in dialectical framework. But I want to talk about really two specific issues that I feel like in the discussion of the apostasy from the online right aren't getting enough attention. And I want to hear what you have to say about them. Mm-hmm. The first is that if you look at the motivations for exiting progressive politics, I would break them into three broad categories. The first is there are people who are frustrated with being dispossessed. The second is there are people who have an axe to grind specifically with the neoliberal managerial types who run it, right? The neoliberal managerial types who run progressivism in the various jurisdictions. In each jurisdiction, they have particular class characteristics. And there are people who, for one reason or another, find themselves at war with the elite class who operate progressivism in their country. So if I look at Canada, weirdly enough, Quebecois nationalists find themselves at war with progressivism, even though they began as a left-wing movement, simply because there's an identity war between Quebecois nationalists and the Laurentian elite who kind of run the neoliberal establishment in the country. And
in America, you see this as the disaffected Bernie bros. Some of them broke right just because they hated Hillary Clinton and, well, the DNC so much.
Yeah, although I'm not sure how coherent a class the disaffected Bernie bros are. I don't really know anything about what this phenotype is, to be honest with you. But I'm sure that in many other jurisdictions, there are people who have like a specific grudge against the neoliberal the class of people in the neoliberal regime. And then the third reason is the civilizational decay reason. Mm-hmm. So when I look at my own opposition to progressivism, it's not actually founded on dispossession. I've done quite well for myself. It's not actually founded on a specific grudge against the neoliberal managers of the country, though I have a great deal of disdain for them for a variety of reasons. It's actually more to do with the fact that the system that they're running is in the midst of destroying. It's in the midst of burning civilizational capital. And the inevitable consequence of this is going to be the destruction of essentially all the territories that once comprised Christendom, except maybe Russia. I view this as, profoundly tragic, and causes belli to go to war against the coalition of progressive governments across the American empire, even causes belli to collapse that empire. But I think it's worth just at this moment thinking about some of all the ways in which progressivism as a force, whether in the current kind of neoliberal instance or even in the more radical instance, which has existed at various times and places throughout the West, has decayed civilization. I think it's worth noting that it is profoundly sterile and causes demographic decline wherever it goes. This is true in all of the forms of this ideology, whether it's in hard communism or whether it's in neoliberalism, because the philosophy is intimately tied with functional atheism, because it's tied with, ironically enough, for an ideology which is often branded as collectivist, it sees the individual as paramount, not the tribe. Mm. And because it sees the individual as paramount, not the tribe, it undercuts the power structures that are fundamental to family formation. and the economic structures that are fundamental to preserving the integrity of families. I mean, I make this point over and over again that when you look at demographic decline throughout the West, people often misattribute the early demographic decline in Western countries to declines in infant mortality. Those two things are not actually particularly correlated. What correlates to the decline from pre-modern fertility is the internal movement of people in association with industrialization and in association with the reorganization of the welfare state. So if you look at France through the 19th century, France had tremendous infant mortality in the 19th century and even 18th century, and had surges of infant mortality because of the political disruptions that went on in that country. And yet it had continuous fertility decline throughout the period. And it did so because throughout the period you saw urbanization going on, and you saw people being uprooted from the societies in which they had lived for hundreds of years and atomized away from their community, and exiting a narrative where having children was part of developing the tribe. Whereas in the after times, having children is an individual decision that's left to you. And if it's an individual decision that's left to you, some people will have children for pleasure, but very few will.
Yeah.
But you also see like all these other ways of in which we have decline. We have, for some reason, this ideology, wherever it goes, results in productivity decline, the inability to make like serious trade-offs between environmental consequences and the and industrial productivity, the inability to kind of have anybody have ownership to make a real decision about the economic development of a country. And it also has this weird property where it locks, where it's perpetually trying to prevent international conflict, and in so doing, it prevents political change. So like international conflict and political change are intimately tied up, because one of the ways in which pressure is applied to a weak regime is the competition between states.
Yeah.
So the more that you try to banish international competition, the more that you prop up kleptocratic weak regimes that are would otherwise collapse in the kind of classic Napoleonic way.
Yeah. I mean, you can see this in Ukraine and a variety of other places. Arguably, the same thing is going on in Iran, although I don't want to equate anything having to do with the Middle East with the broader American empire. I think that the Middle East and the interests of another country are a little too entangled there to figure out whose decline you're really tracing when you look at these kind of desperate wars that never end in that region.
Well, but I mean, the UK, in my opinion, is like poster boy for this. If you transport this UK government back to 1600, it would be over in a week. Because in that environment, international competition with other European powers would create a crisis of competence that would lead to regime change from within, or they just get invaded, and because of their behavior, very few of the nobility and very few of the people would rally to fight for them, and the regime would be over.
Bonnie Prince Charles would have probably no problem reversing the Glorious Revolution if he had to go up against Keir Starmer.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have this property where you have people who oppose, like, reversing the civilizational decline and noting that progressivism is locking you particularly out of economic opportunity. These are two completely different motivations during a period in which Team Red found itself out of power in the U.S., they elegantly aligned. You see this in Canada to some extent, with the kind of hard lock that the Liberal Party of Canada has on power, and you have Western separatists or Western opponents of that elite kind of aligning interest with kind of illiberal political commentators on the basis of the fact that they have kind of a common enemy. But this alliance is doomed to fail if there's ever any success for either the Conservative Party of Canada or Western separatists, because the minute that they come into possession of political power, suddenly they're going to remember that they don't actually agree with people trying to make structural changes to the progressive project in order to reverse civilizational decline.
Yeah. It is an interesting question. I don't exactly know how Canada is going to react to this, because I don't know. I mean, do you think that if any of these opposition parties got into power over the Liberals, they wouldn't just fold?
I mean, my point of view is that Canada has no representation for any political force interested in reversing civilizational decline.
Yeah, that's my impression too.
My point of view is that state of affairs actually also exists in the United States. So if you look at Team Red in the U.S., it is, to quote a friend of mine, the gayest, most female political movement in American history, and it's not even very close. And it's kind of proud of that in certainly in its rhetoric, which I find kind of fascinating, because you find a lot of people who are struggling with what to do here, because on the one hand, obviously Team Blue is a representation of civilizational decline. We've kind of reviewed that. But as far as I can see, there's been no success at all in convincing Team Red that they actually need to do something about any of these problems.
Well, in order to do that, they would need to form an entirely new government, which they can't really do very easily at all. And, that's that. I mean, Trump kind of looked like he might in the first 20 days, 50 days. Like the Doge kind of looked like the beginning of that, but then it just petered out. Now we're back to the neocon plan.
Yeah, I mean, you say he can't. I mean, in some sense, like, obviously Trump is not capable of doing this. On the other hand, like, if you control the executive, you control the military. You have tremendous power to do all kinds of things. You just have to be interested in doing them. And this is what I say. There's this really, like, when we talk about abandoning, when we talk about breaks in the discourse on the right, to me, I think it's necessary and important. Like, if we go back to 2016, it was broadly understood that the most important challenge for people who wanted to transform the United States in a rightward direction was to defeat the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And I actually think that nothing has changed in that regard.
I'd agree with you, yes. I mean, defeat the, yeah, I mean, it's deceptive because Trump seemed like he was that, and he did decrease the power of the old guard, but there's no alternative to the old guard, as I think the war in Iran demonstrates, that they're the ones who ultimately decide the state of exception, are the people who are the neocons, for lack of a better word, or for lack of a more advertiser-friendly word. So, I mean, we still have to defeat the Republican Party, but now the battle lines aren't even really so clearly drawn.
Yeah, this is right, because such a large fraction of those interested in defeating the Republican Party lined up behind Trump, thinking that this was an opportunity to do so. And I mean, in some ways, it's kind of a blessing that one way or the other, Mr. Trump will be off the board soon. You know, what is he, 80?
Yeah, he's off the board. This is his last.
Yeah,
this is his last go around for sure. You know, after pulling off one of the biggest comebacks of all time in American history, he's not going up again, even if he can convince his followers that. And his coalition's broken too.
Well,
I mean, I know
this is
people
the other
dismiss
thing.
this, but I mean, I think the war in Iran, I think that the patriots, the MAGA patriots, really underestimate how much this is going to hurt them going forward, unless they end it like in the next 2 months or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mega patriots I see online radically underestimate the extent to which Donald Trump was elected to make Americans, particularly white Americans, rich again. And one of the consequences of the war in Iran is that white semi-rural Americans are going to be poorer rather than richer. Because all the gains that they make from marginal reversals in DEI are going to get chewed up by the decline in by the economic decline of the United States that is kind of priced into this foreign policy.
Yeah, and it's gonna fracture the coalition, and then the people who represent the Hassan Pikers of the world will be back in.
Yeah,
and
God knows what they're gonna do.
I mean, it'll be like Zoran Mamdani at a federal scale, and you know, I mean, hopefully we'll have prepared enough kind of immune responses by that time to quickly reorganize. But that's going to be a nightmare for the country, and it's you know, I mean, you know, I think this is always the problem, is that white America is kind of under the impression that it doesn't have enough money, when really it just doesn't have enough political power or enough control over its society. And those two things are radically, like, boomers constantly confuse those two things, but they are radically different. You know, they think that, like, okay, well, you know, when I look at the future of my country, either, well, you know, Canada, or we go back and forth, but when I consider the future of my son in either Canada or the United States, which is almost probably certainly going to be the United States, the future looks grim, not because I don't think like there's going to be enough money, although that's also a problem.
Yeah,
it's grim because the way that the boomers, I don't want to throw an entire generation under the bus, but
yeah,
you know, the 20th century, the people who were in charge of the 20th century decided that, you know, the heritage population needed to be a minority, that there needed to be institutions dedicated to dispossessing them in the future. You know, and I'm a person who's on the right in that third category you mentioned. I joined because of the manifest cultural decline, which you could see everywhere. But that is tightly connected with a sort of fear of dispossession, not for myself. You know, like I said, I'm doing fine, well enough, right? I mean, I probably didn't do quite as well as my father did, but you know, it's irrepeatable what happened in the late 20th century. And but my big fear of dispossession is for, you know, the next generation of my family's children, and that's what is being set up before our eyes right now, is just a situation where the only organization politically on the ground is the one that wants to organize against our descendants, and that is totally unacceptable for me. I would easily accept higher gas prices to hold back that future. You know, I don't care, right? It's just, you know, and this is,
well, and one of the ways that I think is rhetorically powerful to make this argument is to say, like, okay, do you need a bigger house to have space to start your family, or do you need a community where you can use the public spaces?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you only need a McMansion because you don't ever want the kids to go outside, right?
Yeah, and you only need that to be out of the urban center because the urban center was ruined, and you only need that to be, you only need a babysitter and somebody to cut your lawn and somebody to clean your house because all of your social bonds were broken because you had to move out of where your family lived for the last however many years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Cue the Ben Shapiro. Oh, you just need to move out. You know, I mean, that is kind of, there is like a steel man behind that proposition on Ben's part, but more important than the steel man is just this idea that we're not moving out of our communities because there's some great opportunity for us in these other areas. We're moving out because we're forced to, and it's impossible not to conceptualize this as basically fleeing, and it's perceived as fleeing too by our political enemies, that they know that when these people move out, that they're in many ways running from their clients and from their policies and from their mishandling of the situation. And so, I think this is something that I don't know. I mean,
the Canadian government,
you can't constantly run.
I mean, the Canadian government is proposing exit taxes for this precise reason, because they know they know that people who are leaving are leaving. I mean, Canada has a huge out-migration problem at both ends of the spectrum, at the low end of the economic ladder and at the very high end of the economic ladder, which is its own kind of fascinating dynamic. But if I look at the apostasy that is occurring on the right, I have to lay some of it back on the reality that if we're going to deal with some of these civilizational problems, we need to find a way to get authentic representation in order to tackle those problems, which necessarily means withdrawing support from political forces that are uninterested in representing those problems.
Well, this is where I'm a little bit more torn, because I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel that I'm betrayed by MAGA, but I feel no inclination to sabotage it.
Well, I want to point out that there's a difference here between what's going on in the United States and what's going on throughout the Anglosphere. So in the United States, migration has declined substantially under Trump, and seems quite likely to increase under a future Democrat administration.
Yeah.
In Canada, if there was magically an election tomorrow morning and Pierre Poilievre was elected, it's almost certain that migration would go up. And the ascendancy of Mark Carney has resulted in the first 3 consecutive quarters of negative net migration in the last 50 years in the country.
Yeah, I found that kind of inexplicable, but also kind of disturbing, because it's obvious that this is kind of like academic agents' dark prophecy that they'll put the woke away. And I part of my optimism comes from the fact that our enemies are they can't stop themselves from Hassan Pikering themselves. But Mark Carney seems to suggest that maybe they can in Canada.
Well, I think the U.S. So I don't understand exactly why the U.S. is different in this regard. But in Canada, I mean, the Liberal Party essentially represents the ruling class in this country. The ruling class in this country has a very clear-cut view that mass migration is a client project to be turned up and turned down to suit them, to suit their economic interests and to suit their social interests. They don't feel mass migration is not understood as a political project in order to win elections. They've been winning elections for the last 120 years, and if they stopped migrating people, if they sent every migrant home, they would still win elections. It's a product in order to minimize the price of Starbucks coffee in downtown Toronto, right? Which mean, and not only that, it's not a project in order to ethically justify themselves according to their own ideology. It's a project in order to dunk on Red America and make their life and maximize their lifestyle. So because it's a fundamentally neoliberal project in instantiation, if the data comes back and says it's bad for their economic interests, they have absolute. I mean, Mark Carney has tripled deportations in the country over the last year. I mean, there's more than 1 million temporary foreign workers who have returned home already. He has no problem doing that because, I mean, fundamentally, these people were here for his convenience. And if they're here for his convenience, they can go for his convenience.
Yeah, I mean, I think we answered our own question here. The reason why they can do this is that the center left is far more secure in Canada. The Democrats need the votes that come in from new immigrants. They need the buy-in from, okay, I'll put it this way. The conservatives can kind of incorporate non-white male young men into their coalition enough to deny the Democrats electoral victories that they need to make their machine work.
Yeah.
They obviously will not win in the long term just based on like the Moneyball situation, right? On average, they will vote for the Democratic coalition. But the Republican Party can put together candidates that will win those voters if they don't directly appeal to them and get them to turn out, which is what people like Hassan Piker do. And because of this, the Democratic Party is much more beholden to its radicals. It's much more insecure, and it kind of has this very schizophrenic nature to itself where, you know, I don't know, the Democratic Party, like when I look at something like the Liberals in Canada, I very much do see an elite institution. I look at the Democrats in America, I just see like this giant with two heads that's constantly arguing with itself. And it's the biggest thing in the pond for sure, but it is highly schizophrenic in how it operates.
Well, this is an important point. So Mark Carney took command of the Liberal Party in a moment of national crisis, but he is not a singular figure particularly. There are dozens of Mark Carneys in the country who have long-standing affiliations with the Liberal Party who could have taken over the Liberal Party in a moment of national crisis of this kind. In the U.S., if I look at, to put this to be a little bit less delicate, the forces of white elite progressivism look almost completely spent to me.
In Canada?
No,
or
in the
America?
U.S.
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, 100% agree. I wrote an essay that was I didn't intend this to be my most popular, called "How Progressivism Died."
Yeah.
And yeah, like white progressivism is dead. Like they have this like dead cat bounce going on with people like Matt Yglesias and.
But Matt Yglesias is not they might be able to get voters.
He has no constituency. It's a dead cat bounce, right? As they say in industry, right? It's like it's a little bit of enthusiasm before. I mean, I guess there is one exception in so far as that there is actually like the white women or like middle-aged unmarried white women will be a asset to the liberal side for the foreseeable future, but they're just going to go with the flow with whatever the third worldists and the technocrats want. They're not an independent ideological entity. They're just going to conform.
Well, and putting ideology to the side for a moment, just like if you think about this in terms of competency to execute as a government, both within the formal government and kind of out into the informal government, there's a fairly competent network that exists in Canada as like a whole, as a coherent ruling class, which is overwhelmingly white progressive. Mm-hmm. That network, if you rewind to 1980, the same was true. Well, maybe 1975, the same was true in the United States. The same kind of network existed. It seems to me that network has entirely degraded. And it has done so extremely quickly. Like, if I go back to the Clinton or Obama era, which is, I guess it's like 20, 25 years ago, there has been, like, the Democratic Party of that era looked way less kleptocratic and way less like a clown show. I really, during the Obama era, you had this transition, and I mean the Biden administration, they're hiring people who were like cross-dressing and stealing women's luggage.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Why is it not possible for the Democratic Party to run a non-clown operation?
Well, this is, when we talk about this, I think that the greatest untold story in American history is the story of what actually went on in the Obama administration.
Yeah.
We just don't know what happened. Something happened, and it happened around 2000, like the transition between the first term and the second term, 2011, 2012. Something qualitatively changed inside the Obama administration. It was driven by probably Barack Obama himself. I think that Barack Obama was always the father of clown world. He didn't look that way, and his entire career was set on him selling himself as kind of this establishmentarian, good government kind of person. But in reality, like, I think the real Barack Obama was like this deeply vindictive person who was not at home in his own skin. And this sort of attitude about how America should be run through people who are vindictive and revenge seeking eventually kind of became the Democratic Party from 2011 to 2017.
It's interesting you say that because, obviously through the cathedral, I received the messaging that Barack Obama was this profoundly statesman-like figure, thoughtful and erudite. But listening to him speak, and just like stand up the historical footage of Barack Obama speaking versus, I don't know, what's his name, who ruled during the Iran-Contra crisis?
Reagan?
No, the predecessor to Reagan.
Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, Jimmy Carter. So if you stand the two figures up together, according to the cathedral, Jimmy Carter is not very impressive, and Barack Obama is tremendously impressive.
Yeah.
But if you actually hear them speak, you might disagree with Jimmy Carter, but he's actually rooted in the old world to a degree. He is obviously much better educated. He's a much higher quality speaker. Just if I was looking at hiring an executive, I would hire Jimmy Carter over Barack Obama 100 times out of 100.
Well, I mean, Jimmy Carter is much, much, much more intelligent than Barack Obama. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
I say it, just like raw IQ. And,
I think Jimmy Carter is
older world too. I mean,
like Jimmy Carter is still making allusions to the Roman LARP that began America. Mm-hmm. It's much more serious, much more. I mean, you pointed out the intelligence factor, that's obviously the case as well. But also he's much more emotionally continent. And I mean, one of the things that really strikes me about the Trump presidency is how much of a joke everything is. Mm-hmm. Whether it's like, I'm going to declare tariffs based on a back of the envelope calculation, 50% of the trade deficit, that's the tariff. Say what you want about previous administrations, they would have had some technocratic bullshit for why the tariff was what it was, right?
Yeah.
Equally in the Iran war, I mean, the official statement on the State Department's website is we went to war in support of our friends and allies in Israel. At least there was a pretense with Iraq too. Like, there was months of, we're gonna pretend they have weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam Hussein is the second coming of the Mustache Man, and all of this other stuff.
I remember that. But there's another transitionary figure in this process too, and that was Bill Clinton.
Yeah,
I mean, Bill Clinton
Slick Willie.
Yeah, before Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush was a statement of the old variety, and Bill Clinton was a transition to kind of being post whatever that was. And it's I guess George Bush was kind of following in that pattern, I should say.
But in the Anglosphere, this transition tried to happen. So Justin Trudeau was a figure of this transition. Boris Johnson in the UK was a figure of this transition kind of trying to happen. But it never quite did. The serious people were never actually driven out of politics in Canada. They were... I mean, Justin Trudeau was a very unserious figure, so was Chrystia Freeland, and they managed to get in control of the Liberal Party for a fairly brief period of time, but a very critical period of time. But they never drove all of the serious people out and re-architected the culture of the Liberal Party. Just like in Labour, I don't know what Keir Starmer is, but he's not of the Barack Obama unserious mold. Whatever he is, he's some kind of creature from, he's the man who doesn't dream. Like,
yeah, the gray man. They just kind of wheeled him, blew the dust off him, and they wheeled him out of some back closet in Parliament. And
even on the other side, like Rupert Lowe, who is emerging to throw his hat in the ring as a potential competitor to replace the right half of the dialectic in British Parliament, is a serious figure. He takes his role in that process very seriously, for better or for worse. And you see the same thing in Australia as well. When they decided to make anti-Semitism illegal, they really decided to make anti-Semitism illegal. And whereas this is not in the U.S., it seems like it's clowns all the way down.
Well, here you go. I think that the United States is in a more advanced state of collapse than are these satellites of the global American empire. I think that slowly, I think this will begin in Canada. I think it will then carry over to places like Australia. You will start getting more clownish politicians because the governments there will start becoming more insecure. Now, maybe that will cause kind of a cascading effect, because I think the respectability of these parties is much more important to maintain on the periphery. I don't think that Canada or Australia or UK liberals would tolerate what goes on in the Democratic Party in the United States. And there might be a realignment triggered from that. But my working theory is that the United States is in a more advanced stage of collapse than are the European and extra-European Western countries like Australia and New Zealand.
It's interesting you say that, because I play with the idea of characterizing Mark Carney as a national unity candidate, right? Mm-hmm. Similar to the national unity government that was compelled by the king in the 30s in the United Kingdom and ruled continuously until after the Second World War. In that it is a representation of all the different ideological components that make up the Laurentian elite. It excludes the Western elite and it excludes the Quebecois elite, but it is a representation of all ideological positions within the Laurentian elite. Whereas the Trudeau government, prior to external pressure, was a representation of only one ideological current within the Laurentian elite, and was therefore kind of clownish and, very much along the model of the Barack Obama government, even right down to its tendency to vindictively punish its political enemies. Mark Carney would be very effective in suppressing the truck convoy, but he never would have been as clumsy about it as Justin Trudeau was.
It's kind of remarkable how similar Justin Trudeau and Barack Obama are for a variety of reasons. Well, they're both these kind of like eternal boy, man-child kind of characters. They're lusted after by all of these kind of effeminate liberals and seen as kind of golden boys, and then they kind of project themselves as technocrats while at the same time beating the kind of most self-destructive aspects of their respective societies.
Well, and they both have this weird.
They both seem gay too.
Yeah, this not quite confirmed. Like,
I mean, I do appreciate Katy Perry, that whole weird thing that's going on right now.
Yeah,
but
I'm fast. I can't take my eyes off Justin Trudeau's post-Canadian career, for a whole variety of reasons.
Coachella, what is he, 50? He's in his 50s, right?
He's in his 50s.
He's in his 50s. Like, he must be at least 10 years older than me. Like, so he's in his 50s and he's taking his girlfriend to Coachella. Like, what is going on?
It's amazing, Dave. It is amazing.
It's like, I wouldn't go to Coachella, and I'm younger than he is. I wouldn't have gone to Coachella when I was 10 years younger than I am right now. That's something that I would have done when I was like 24, 25, and even then I would consider it indulgent. Like, what is he spiritually deriving from this? Like, he's looking at this like, oh my, this is such an experience I'm having with Katy Perry in one arm, and a Pabst Blue ribbon in the other. Looking at acts for people like Sabrina Carpenter, who are like old enough to be his children. Like, she's old enough to be his daughter. What is going on?
Well, I mean, it's amazing on so many levels. First of all, he basically can't come back to Canada, right?
Well, I don't know. I think he likes him to Tofino well enough, doesn't he?
No, I mean, he got heckled in Tofino, right?
Oh yeah, I know. I was there and I saw hecklers. He came around.
So like he got heckled so badly in Whistler that he stopped going there on vacation.
I'm kind of surprised because I always thought Whistler and Tofino were like shit love central.
Well, they are.
They turned on him.
This is the issue, right? Yeah. Because he represents only one ideological current in that group, you can't actually escape the way you can in the U.S. to like a liberal area, I guess.
It's amazing because it's like Barack Obama too. It's like he feels like a little boy. Like, Barack Obama is just like he's still like the kid in college, and so is Justin Trudeau. He hasn't like deep thought about the future of his country. He's just managing. It's like he's still trying to like prove himself or something.
Yeah.
He's still trying to discover who he is, and he's like 50 years old, led one of the largest countries in the world. And now he's retired to discover who he is. Not retire in like not retire in the way that Jimmy Carter did by like joining Habitat for Humanity, or even like George W. Bush did, painting pictures on the ranch, but just like discovering who he is, a new adolescence. It's bizarre.
I mean, it is, in my opinion, one of the great. So I talked earlier a bit about the civilizational decline of really all of Christendom is in this condition. Mm-hmm. But if I look generationally within elite classes, the decline is profound. And Justin Trudeau is one of the examples I repeatedly cite. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, in my opinion, is the single worst prime minister Canada has ever had. And yet he was a serious person who thought deeply about sovereignty, right? Mm-hmm. I frequently play clips of him on the channel talking about sovereignty because he understood Schmittian politics really, really well, and exercised the sovereign exception. I mean, he understood it well enough that the Canadian Constitution that he essentially wrote recognized the Schmittian exception for the sovereign formally in the Constitution. Like, we have the notwithstanding clause and the War Measures Act both encoded into the 1980 Constitution that he wrote and then attempted to pass. In like the biggest neoliberal kind of end of history document in the world, you have this weird section where it points out that the sovereign can ignore the rest of this document whenever it's in the national interest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Canada will eternally be a mystery for me, at least. It's it's kind of bizarre, I feel like, to kind of look at it from the outside.
Well, I think part of the reason Canada is a mystery to you is that all political power in Canada is concentrated in a part of Canada to which you've almost never been.
Oh yeah, the Ontario.
Yeah, well, between Toronto and Montreal, 100% of the political power in the country resides, and most of it resides with people who speak both French and English. These are people with whom, unless you have a much broader set of relationships than I'm aware of, you've probably never spoken.
My grandmother lived in Montreal, but my time there was spent almost entirely in a German-speaking community that was off in Dorval somewhere. So,
yeah. So I mean, it's easy to misapprehend Canada if you. It would be like trying to paint a picture of American politics, never having met a person from Brooklyn, or never having experienced the Ivy League.
It is really strange, though, just because I don't know. It feels like the Canadian elite, they're so secure, but they're at the same time they don't think at all about the future. They just kind of look at whatever American shitlibs are doing, and then take their hands off the steering wheel, and like you said, organize their nation's future around what delivers them cheap nannies and cheap help.
Well, this is the interesting thing. Because of their because of the civilizational decline into which we're locked, they're incapable of thinking about inheritance as an essential predicate to the nation. And there's something about what happened in the 20th century where the nation state cannot exist without the principle of inheritance.
Yeah.
And yet, from the FDR regime to all of its clients, they all declared war on inheritance as fundamentally illegitimate.
Which is just so bizarre, right? We declare the very thing that makes a nation like it's a crime. Like the inheritance tax. I mean, the inheritance tax, I've talked to Carl about this. It's more symbolic. I mean, we all get taxed enough as it is, but the inheritance tax is this huge symbolic, attack on how people should ordinarily conceptualize themselves as part of a whole. And they dismiss it we should have 100% inheritance tax, or these insane high percentages on inheritance, which is just it feels. Well,
they treat the principle of inheritance as if it is fundamentally illegitimate.
Yeah, exactly, and that is feels insane.
Yeah, and so when you talk about the short-term thinking of the Laurentian elite, it's not short-term if you think inheritance is an illegitimate principle. It is designed to shore up the position of the Laurentian elite for the remainder of the lifetime of the Laurentian elite. Assuming that their children are intended to, assuming that your plan is to die with zero and your children have no meaning particularly. But I mean, that fascinating discussion though that is, there's a couple of other, there's another thing that I want to make sure we cover just while I've got your attention. We touched on this when we talked about Mr. Trump and the American right. There's this way in which the online anti-progressive intellectual has this tri-purpose, this threefold set of purposes behind what he does. The first purpose is it has to be an entertainment product because it has to get attention online. The second is that there's a hard intellectual project that has coexisted for a long time. And then the third element of it is these people feel compelled to participate to not just analyze politics, but participate in politics in the various jurisdictions in which they operate. And it feels to me like the third of these goals has really affected the way that these intellectuals see the world right at the moment. So I'll give two quite different examples. The first example is the kind of trust the plan. I'm a propagandist for Trump now because, he's a manifestation of my politics. My role is now not to partake of my intellectual project, but to maximize his political future. We're all familiar with that.
Yeah.
The second example of this is, okay, I'm an elite theorist. That means politics is about who and whom. The premier accomplishment in politics is to replace a ruling class with a ruling class of a different identity. We identify a significant element of the American ruling class as this coalition between Zionist Jews and Zionist non-Jews. And so all my politics now are not about things that I believe. They're about replacing this group of people with some other group of people, because the assumption, the predicate of my politics is that everything that happens politically is downstream from the identity of the ruling class. The only game in town politically is replacing the ruling class. And so all of the opinions I'm going to express are outworkings of efforts to replace this ruling class. The logic of why cheerleading Trump undermines the interest of your content is kind of straightforward. Walk me through what you think of the second proposition.
This is very difficult. I share a lot of the anti-Zionist sympathies of someone like Academic Agent. I hope I'm representing his opinion properly here, but I feel that it sort of falls into the same category as the people who cheerlead Trump. I mean, what we get for cheerleading Trump is very, very little. And that is because sort of the die is already cast. The Zionists inside the Republican Party, I mean, we need to kind of extricate ourselves from them in the sense that a priority, like you said before, a priority needs to be kind of replacing the ruling elites of the Republican Party itself. But I fundamentally see, okay, I mean, let me start over. There's basically there will never be more than three tactics anybody can take when it comes to unseating a political establishment. The first one's accelerationism. You accelerate the decline and then hope that you drive the system into crisis, and then whatever you have comes in as a replacement. There's parallelism, which is kind of, in combination with the other two, is to develop some kind of a pseudo government that is outside of that project and that operates in parallel with it, but is not affected by the same forces of decline. And then third, you have entryism, right? If it's not one of those three things, then it's not really a strategy. Sitting on the sidelines going, I mean, by all means, call out the crimes of this administration and the stupidity of this war. But I don't see to what end either accelerationism, parallelism, or entryism, to what end does kind of turning your entire project into an anti-Zionist project actually help you replace the Republican Party as it is? And that's the missing piece for me. It would be incredibly different. And I've said this in so many words to Academic Agent. It would be incredibly different if there was some kind of anti-Zionist sane left that they were willing to go into coalition for us, but if they knew we were serious about removing the neocons at the federal level. But that's not the case.
Well, I think the missing, the center of this disagreement is I think this distinction we talked at length with about this distinction between the Anglosphere left and the American left, where the Anglosphere left is dominated by essentially white neoliberal progressives who are progressive because there were being progressive was high status and emanated from the United States, right? And they easily discard their progressivism when it suits them because it's an affectation. It's not essential to their political power, except they have to appear progressive enough in order to have status from the United States. Whereas the American left is in this very different position. I don't think that there has been adequate academic work done to understand what happened to the Democratic Party between 2000 and today.
Yeah, there's a lot of different vectors for that.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about DEI, obviously, but to completely gut an organization in a period of 25 years, I mean, maybe.
There used to be kind of a distinction between West Coast progressives and East Coast progressives. There were East Coast progressives that were more kind of like red diaper babies. I'm talking about like the 80s and 90s when I grew up. And then there were people from Berkeley, and like people like, Harvard is progressive, Berkeley is progressive.
Yeah, but they're different.
Exactly. The progressivism from Harvard, they're all like red diaper babies, and the progressivism from Berkeley was all like third world as shit, Yeah. And eventually, through figures like Noel Ignatieff and the Ivy League wasn't immune from this.
Yeah.
I think the third world strand is kind of won out eventually. And they kind of consumed the American elite to a certain degree. And, now you just have huge swaths of the American elite in these places that are like, Chief Justice Jackson and Chief Justice Sotomayor.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great example. If you look at Chief Justice Jackson, she's there, like, there's no quality there.
Yeah, Sotomayor Jackson. Sotomayor just looks like a blank cup, right? Like, it's like. Also, can we please stop doing this? Like, I just went over this scandal with this gay father that was named Shane McGinley, and every time I was like, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Like, do I live in a simulation? If I were to like create like a stereotype of a justice that was picked. I mean, Biden basically said, I'm going to pick like a black woman. I don't know who it is yet, but it's going to be a black woman. It's like Ketanji Brown Jackson. What part of the name does not indicate that she's African American?
Well, and she's going to talk more than everyone else on the court combined.
And say less. Yeah. I mean, I guess Sotomayor is more representative of just like, because she was Princeton, right?
Yeah.
And I always never went to Princeton, but I lived there for quite a few years. And it is kind of funny because when I see her speak, Princeton was always sort of associated with being the most erudite place in the entire country, like even more than Harvard and Yale to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And she carries this kind of incredible, I mean, Ketanji Brown Jackson just talks a lot and says nothing, but Sotomayor just looks kind of vacant. Do you know what I mean? Just kind of, I don't know. But that's a good, like an enormous amount of the American progressive elite are those kinds of people at this stage. And so whatever ideology basically unifies that class of people, it has to accommodate people like that. And, I think this is what gives it a lot of its fundamental instability, which is why I say that there's no way you can avoid the Hassan Pikerization of the Democratic Party.
Well, it's interesting because in my professional life, I've recently had cause to spend quite a bit of time with like core elite white women Democrats from the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And, I can't believe how like childish and unserious they are.
Did you watch that interview with the New York Times and Hassan Piker?
Yeah, a little bit of it.
Could you believe that? It was like this is the New York Times, and they have these like cackling women who are they're gabbing with them like they're like undergraduate, like they're horny undergraduates, and the captain of the football team stopped by. I mean, it's absolutely nuts.
Well, and the other interesting thing about it is these people are not like 17.
No, they're like 45.
Yeah,
they're 45. It's like the Justin Trudeau effect. They're 45 and they're acting like, and this is serious. I mean, are we not? Don't we have any amount of seriousness? I don't know. I'm answering I know we don't, but isn't the New York Times supposed to present itself like it is a serious?
But this comes back to like a fundamental point I was trying to access earlier. The Laurentian elite in Canada, for rightly or wrongly, perceived the rise of Donald Trump as like an existential threat to their position in the country, combined with separatist movements in the West and the East. And so they reached into the bench and they found, not only did they reach into the bench, they found somebody serious, they also, as a class, sobered up and return to some of their deeper commitments, right? Mark Carney, for example, was the leader of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is part of this tremendous green looting operation that's been going on across the globe. But he put that down, right? The Net Zero Banking Alliance is no more.
Yeah.
He said, well, it's there's a threat to our position. It's time to stop capturing gains sexually for myself and my class, and instead protect the position of my class within the nation. And I don't understand why that response has not been replicated in the United States.
I guess I think that our ruling class is too diverse. I mean that in both senses of the word. I think the fact that I don't know very much about the Laurentian elite, but someone who's lived all over Canada, I still have never lived in a place where apparently they come from.
Yeah.
And so I think what you start off immediately is you start off with an American ruling elite that is much more diverse than the Canadian one and much less insular, and so it can't turn on a dime. And then factor into that also the fact that I think that the American elite has, I don't want to say suffered more from affirmative action, but kind of. Well, I mean, they've been forced to concede more ground to outsiders, and because of that, their coalition is just kind of like this loose alliance of very kind of comfortable people, and it's not an easy sell.
If I might put one final point to you, the American elite don't seem to fear their own dispossession, nor do they seem to believe in the possibility of their defeat. Right?
Good point. Yeah.
So, like, the thing that strikes me about this Iran war, I mean, there are a number of features about it that I think are interesting, but one of the things that I think is really interesting is it doesn't seem that the cluster around Donald Trump contemplated the consequences of an American failure in the operation, not like politically to the Republican Party or whatever, but to the position of the global American ruling class, right?
Yeah.
If this keeps going the way that it's going today, like one of the things that amazes me is if you had if this was George H.W. Bush running the United States, there would be a massive military buildup for a ground invasion of Iran right now.
Yeah.
For sure. There isn't any reaction of that type because it doesn't seem like the American ruling class are contemplating the possibility that the Iranian government could persist in attacking their client states in the Gulf indefinitely and permanently dislodge them from that. I mean, the client states in the Persian Gulf are one of 3 or 4 of the most important pillars of the American empire globally.
Mm-hmm.
and they're just being discarded without spending. Like, if you think about, I don't know how many personnel the American military has, but it's a couple of million. Can you imagine any other empire giving up a key pillar of its structure without spending, 5% of its military in casualties? It doesn't make any like the level of aversion, like and kind of unseriousness with which this is being treated is just it's a striking feature just as a historian.
Well, I mean, I think that the fact that the American empire is kind of headless at this stage means that it's basically being taken over by people who, to the extent that they have any foresight, they're not thinking about America's future. They're thinking about possibly other
their own country's future.
and their own position inside America, and that's what they're really worried about. And
I mean, to me, the parallels are uncanny with kind of 4th century Rome, where you have these status games being played within a city that's about to come under siege.
Yeah.
And the American Empire is not in as dire a position as 4th century Rome is. The barbarians aren't, aren't outside the Mexican border with a large army at this point. But certainly the condition of that empire is much worse than the status games that are being played within its elite would tend to suggest.
Yeah, and I think this is that is. I mean, I actually am just kind of curious about what the right wing wants to do. The people who actually are concerned about the future of their children and their society. Well, I do not know how to get. It's like Jurassic Park. Like, I have no idea how to get this thing back online without. And so, okay, so is it just going to be, is the American empire just going to be an indefinite decline? In which case, I'm almost kind of less interested in anti-Zionism than I am in who rules North America. And I guess this is another problem I have with academic agents.
Well, this is a really important point. One of the reasons why I highlighted civilizational decline as a dividing line in terms of why you're interested in this discourse, because if you imagine a future in which the American empire eventually collapses, which is the future that I think is the most likely future. I think that you and I will live to see the end of the American empire as we have known it, which means that the position, like in that future, the Zionist project becomes irrelevant because the capacity to support it from North America ceases to exist.
Yeah.
And so those people are, God only knows what those people are going to do with themselves. But most of my politics is concerned with the question of what will come after. It's very far-sighted. It is intended to maximize the opportunity of my children and hopefully my eventual grandchildren, should God give them to me. The future of my people in kind of the generational sense. I appreciate, and the tension that has been presented to me when I've kind of played with this idea is my first reaction to the frame that your primary concern needs to be replacing the current ruling class of the American empire because change is kind of top down was, okay, that's nice, but my people are profoundly weak and there's nothing I can do particularly to affect the ruling class of the American empire. So what are we even talking about? My politics need to be about building my own people up so that they might be strong enough to craft a future for themselves in the world that comes after, right? On the other hand, like the other side of this dialectic is that how do you begin to build the people up without having any material political control in a system that is like increasingly, aggressive about dispossessing you in order to prop up the system for, the next 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't been able to kind of answer that. The only thing that I would say is that I really don't think that public anti-Zionism is going to displace the ruling class of the American empire.
Yeah.
And I mean, even if it did, I would still have the same ruling class in Canada who, are pretty well divorced from this project.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sympathize with people who are very upset about this, because I am too. But this is always where I kind of tap out, is just I don't see how making anti-Zionism the number one issue plays into a long-term strategy. Now, I'd be happy for someone to sit down and tell me about how it does.
Well,
but
so here's the steel man of that argument. So the steel man of that argument is that one of the most impressive features of this political movement has been its ability to repeatedly capture its emergent enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you rewind the clock 100 years, and you look at all of the successive political movements that have risen at the imperial center in the United States, repeatedly these movements have been might have held one position on Zionism at their inception and another position on Zionism as they approach their ascendancy into political power.
Yeah, agreed.
And they're captured repeatedly by a combination of entryism and carrot and stick tactics and all kinds of different things. And so if you've got a long-term vision that is constrained to the period of time where your nation is going to have a foreign policy that materially affects the Middle East, then entryism of this kind or capture of this kind is going to be an inevitable feature of any political movement that you attempt to launch. And you have to reckon with that to the extent that your political movement is likely to be successful.
Yeah, and that's challenging.
I mean, I don't have this problem because the years in which Canada will have a foreign policy that affects the Middle East, ended 40 years ago. Maybe ended like infinity years ago. But the United States does have this problem. Until there's a material change in the character of the country, it's going to be a global great power with tremendous ability to project that power abroad. And there's going to be a battle for control of that foreign policy.
And, look, I mean, there's no way to really answer this. I've gotten this challenge from people like Pete Quinones, and they've fed me this challenge before. I can't guarantee against future subversion. I just can't, right? Like it's a question of the fortitude and the foresight of the individual actors. What I can say, though, is that in all my dealings with kind of Zionist bad actors, I've been able to feed them just a few kind of common sense propositions about identity and about the ultimate telos of a Western state and the commitments we need to make to our posterity. And through those questions, I've been able to get people to basically reveal themselves as being kind of, if not dishonest, then harboring an unspoken double standard that they won't admit to. And there's been some exceptions or people who are, that like Israel who pass that test. But for the most part, that's really filtered out the bad actors. So I will always just say that, let's talk about our core commitments. Let's talk about what we want the future to be. And, I think to a certain extent, the ability of this movement to just capture everything in the past, I think it's been more or less a function of the late 20th century and the boomer generations. I'm using that in plural to mean the silent generation and and Gen X and the boomers, all the people that were raised with the post-World War II TV propaganda. In that environment, these interests have been able to capture all sort of opposition. But I don't know if that still applies. And in my own dealings, I have felt that just asking people basic questions, again, about just kind of common sense things about the identity of the nation and its relationship to Christianity and all these things, just those kind of the questions that would have been easy to answer before 1946 for anyone on the entire Western world. Just going through those questions and re-asking them and just kind of comparing the answers they have for you to the answers they would have for another country in the Middle East, that has been sufficient for my purposes to reveal the bad actors and to know who I can work with and who I can't.
Yeah. I mean, your point that you can't guarantee against future subversion is an interesting one. One of the things that I think is a weakness of, I mean, the United States is this way, but broadly the entire American empire is a commercial oligarchy where elites tend to measure themselves in terms of financial assets, which has created a structure in which subversion is almost uniquely easy. If I contrast this with like a different situation, if you look at the political history of Vladimir Putin, he comes up with handlers who believe that he's part of the American empire and deeply attached to a kind of oligarchy which is looting the country, which has deep associations with a certain country in the Middle East. And it turns out that when he seizes power after the Moscow apartment bombings, he has his own ideas about how he's going to wield absolute power, and no number of dollars is going to divert him from those ideas. Because at bottom, Vladimir Putin is not drawn from the commercial elite. He's drawn from a different... in Pareto's terms, he's a different type. He's got different he's got different residues. And I wonder if the only way to escape this paradigm begins with drawing elites from other classes of society. And I say this as, you know, my business is my day job is in the financial industry. I'm certainly not drawn from another class of society, but I wonder if a future drawing elites from another genre is really an essential part of the way forward.
All these hard questions.
Yeah.
The problem here, Black Horse, is that, you know, we don't necessarily have the control. We can give it our best shot.
Yeah,
right. And I think
I think we should draw elites from somewhere else. Like I can also write essays about how the right should grow up, and it doesn't happen. You know.
Well, you know, I think some people are growing up. I like to think. I look at, you know, a lot of people that I know, and it seems like they are growing up to a certain extent. You know, I think there's been a lot of progress made just in terms of organization, but I mean, you can't control the future. And I think that a lot of this spurgery that's happened in the last month or so would really be solved if people could just admit a certain kind of epistemic humility about their preferred strategies. Yeah. They talk about these things about what they're not even talking about, like who you are as a person. Or you know, you're wrong about this idea or that, or you should really be going for this objective rather than that. But they look at like your near term policy object level outcomes that you're pursuing, and then based on whether those sort of short term object level policy outcomes are their preferred ones at this time, they judge you to be sort of like serious or not serious, or someone that they need to like completely cut off or declare as a shill. And I don't think politics works that way. You know, I think that politics works at our level by discovering who you can trust. And I don't think that near-term object level outcomes it really tells you a lot in that regard. It can, in combination, like a pattern of bad calls and hypocrisies can tell you that the person is not trustworthy. But I don't think that it will help you in the long term when you're trying to develop a coalition for these longer term outcomes that we're trying to pursue.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very strong argument. Though what exactly the outcome of this argument is a little bit more complicated. It's a strong argument that we ought to. So, if I could work my will, you would drive a lot of people out of the discourse on the basis of their immaturity and unseriousness. Like, you recently had a set of engagements on Twitter, I think on YouTube as well, with a figure Bazillion Thought.
Yeah, I might have a conversation with him later, but we'll see if that ever happens.
I mean, my view is that this character is like the quintessential negative stereotype of a homosexual.
Well, come on, he's basically just Milo Yiannopoulos in a different shade, right?
Well, but like the negative stereotype of a homosexual is that they're like disinterested in the long-term future, that they are inconsistent, that they're
two-faced.
Yeah, and they're overly hedonistic and kind of obsessed with their own maximizing their own outcome in the kind of short-term sense of the word.
Mm-hmm.
And this like insane preference for the now that comes out of certain figures, like in from my own point of view, the most interesting part of what was then called the dissident right was what I called the dad right, which was people who were thinking generationally and civilizationally about their peoples and about the kind of the consequences to their actions at the individual level, at the community level, at the political level, in this kind of longue durée. And they had this long view because it's a long view that tends to dominate the psychology of a certain kind of man. And that certain kind of man, in my view, is the only person who should be participating in politics. I mean, I have the very strong view that every other class of person besides this person should be excluded from politics explicitly because there's only a pretty narrow slice of society that can see away from their immediate needs and away from the immediate consequences of their actions to their own reputation.
Well, I mean, I'll put it this way, right? And there's sort of three categories, right? There are the civilians, like just the populace writ large, which is like, children and, the lower half of women. And then you have kind of like the stakeholders, which are like politically aware women and average men who don't really think beyond kind of like sports ball and wholesome desires to have families and stuff like that. And, then there are what I would call like the representative stakeholders. And that's the class that you're talking about. They're the people that make up kind of like the elite classes and that think in terms of the long-term effect on their collective. I think there are very few women in this class of people. It's almost exclusively patriarchs, but oftentimes, what people will do is that they'll kind of go above that and they'll go like, well, when we talk about once in a generation genius talent, like Julius Caesar, then they kind of break the mold on the dad right. But I mean, there's like
they
one
stand
of
on
those
the
guys,
they stand on the shoulders of a whole class, right?
They need to command the patriarchs. They need to command that kind of representative stakeholder class, and B, there's only like one of them. Whereas every autist that is kind of living a disinvested, degenerate life otherwise online thinks that he's like following this I break the bourgeoisie mold. and I'm elite because I don't care about these deep familial issues. And I don't know. There are certainly will be one or two of those people inside a generation. I don't think that there's going to be a group chat involving them. I'll say that.
Yeah.
If you're invited to a discourse group that pretends to represent like those kind of generational figures, then you're probably being sold a bill of goods.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the areas in which I kind of agree with Academic Agent that the discourse needs to close a little bit, and not just like exclude people who are unimpressive. And I say this as a tiny little channel that doesn't have a vast audience. People might think that I should be excluded from the discourse. Maybe so. But I do think that there's got to be a lot of that there needs to be some shakeout that goes on here. Mm-hmm. And people can disagree on exactly the criteria for shaking people out, but I think the criteria that you came back to about like the kind of the interpersonal characteristics of the actors, I think, are an undervalued element of it, where like people have to be an authentic representation in their online persona of what they actually are in order to be valuable and consistent over time. Anyways, we're running up on time. We're well past where I would ordinarily take this podcast. But, you do 2-hour monologues in your own show, so we have to stretch it out a bit.
I somehow, even in hour-long shows, I tend to go on for 2 hours. But thank you for having me.
Yeah, is there anything you want to highlight or comment on before we wrap up?
I'll just tell the audience that I think that we are entering a post-discourse age, but not a post-political age. I think politics is more relevant than it ever has been. But the new energy is all going to be in organization, in the development of communities, of ideas, of scholarship, and of art. And all that's going to involve organization. And a lot of it will be done in places that are not so tightly linked to social media. So if you're interested in these ideas or even the future of our people, like just talking about the broadly Western people that we want to kind of preserve a nucleus of that civilization, I would really encourage people to look into the many projects that have to do with organization and preservation and actually getting things done, in the real world, but also just creating something that's worth more than one cycle of the algorithm. And I said that as a blogger. So obviously, there are the projects that we've started. I have like this running list of them on my alternative blog called the Redwood Society. That is also a community building organization, and I just want people to get involved. That's my big advice, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, obviously, there are a number of community projects that I support. For my audience, this is my last intervention in the broader right-wing discourse for a while. I promise I will come back to Canadian politics for a couple of weeks. You can hear me complain about the new Mark Carney majority when I get a chance to do the next community stream. But Dave, I very much appreciate you coming on. I quite enjoy a lot of what you've had to say, and hopefully we can do this again at some point. I'm glad we finally did a stream where I have a working microphone. So.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right, and to the audience, thanks for your time and attention. I hope you learned something.
Canada originally was put together by two groups of people who didn't have much in common but didn't want to be American.
The line just popped into my head. A bunch of the boys was a-whooping it up. And there I got my start.
We have had a flag. Flags can be changed. But flags cannot be imposed, the sacred symbols of a people's hopes and aspirations. by the simple, capricious, personal choice of a Prime Minister of Canada.
I have watched this country for half of my life from abroad, and we have turned complacency into just that, a national sport.
I am resolutely opposed to all innovation, all change, but I am determined to understand what's happening. I don't choose just to sit and let the juggernaut roll over me.